Today on the Mr. Maple Show, we interview Douglas Justice. Hey guys, welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. We appreciate you joining the podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tim. And today we've got a super fun one for you. We're talking to a plant explorer, someone who goes out into the wild and collects maples out in the wild. I mean, how much more exciting can you get?
Hey, first thing guys, like, subscribe, share. Find us on any of your major podcast platforms. It can be Pandora, iTunes, Spotify. We're on pretty much everything now. Go out, check us out. Give us a 5-star review. That goes a long way toward helping our content get out there to other people. And Douglas Justice, it's going to open you up to something new. I think a lot of you collectors might not even know about this interesting world of plant exploration. Now, Douglas is one of the most interesting guys I know. I've traveled with him to Belgium, and he's somebody I always seek out at the Maple Society meetings. He's always that guy that says like, hey, let's go catch something later and hang out and talk about plants. And, I never miss an opportunity to get to the side with him and just pick his brain, because he's such an intelligent guy when it comes to maples. But he's such a fascinating guy because he really gets out and does the exploration. One of the top identifiers of maple species in the world.
I love when the Maple Society goes and tours gardens and you're actually seeing him go walking around looking at plants. And I just quietly walk behind him and do my best to listen and soak up anything that he says, because everything he says is pure gold when it comes to identifying species. And just love Douglas Justice and the eye he has for plants. It's amazing that people like this go out in the wild in different countries, these foreign countries, go through all this rough terrain and everything, and then go out and collect plants and bring them back to the United States or bring them back to Canada. I mean, it's an amazing process that a lot of people might not know about. So I think this podcast coming up today is going to really open your eyes to this whole new world of plant explorers going out in the wild and what they go through during this process. I think that's pretty awesome.
Oh, it's plant exploration, but it's also plant preservation. And they're finding things that would otherwise get, maybe cut down or not valued the same way. And they're making sure these things continue. They're making sure that those genetics are preserved for future generations. I think it's fascinating stuff. I mean, some of the places he describes going to seem like the lost world. I mean, it seems like, the land before time, Jurassic Park, and Douglas kind of has that star quality. He seems like a guy who could star in that movie for sure. He's got the charisma there, but we wanted to get him on camera for you today and kind of show you what we love about talking about to our friend Douglas Justice.
So I hope you all enjoy this interview. Douglas Justice is Associate Director of Horticulture and Collections at UBC Botanical Garden and Natobe Memorial Garden in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. He is also involved in the public industry extension and teaches courses in plant identification and horticulture at UBC. A Vancouver native, Douglas trained in the nursery production at a local wholesale nursery prior to earning degrees in horticulture and botany. Throughout his working life, Douglas's involvement with horticulture groups and plant professional societies, including the Maple Society, as well as his involvement in plant diversity surveys, allowed him to travel widely. Douglas Justice is an author, world traveler, and maple collector. Awesome dude. We love hanging out with Douglas Justice.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is we get to hang out at some of these Maple Society events. We're actually closing out the Maple Society event today. And I always just think we have great conversations. I always get inspired talking to you. It's a fun conversation. And, it's a great reason to join the Maple Society. We'll go ahead and put a plug in for the Maple Society. But I just think you're an interesting guy.
Well, I mean, thanks. I think you guys are pretty interesting. I have a great deal of respect for people who are in the industry. I started out in the nursery business, and I left that not because I didn't like growing plants, but other opportunities arose. but like I watched you guys from afar, perhaps, but I watched you guys go from being basically rank amateurs to
when you first met us, we really knew nothing. So that's fair to say.
Now we know less nothing.
Yeah, well, that's true. But no, I mean, having a conversation with you then was fascinating. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. You guys are really driven to do a good job. That you're in my opinion, you're the best kind of nursery growers in that you want to make the world a better place. You want to do this for all the right reasons. It's not.
Well, I appreciate that. We've always, we didn't have academic backgrounds in horticulture, so it's kind of self-serving to seek out guys like you because we just soak so much up having conversations with you, and in many ways we've learned so much more about species and what's possible by just bus conversations at Maple Society meetings.
Yeah, I love those bus conversations.
So, Douglas, we're going to start this out with something really simple and easy, maybe.
Yeah.
What is your favorite maple?
You can't ask me that. That's, other people ask me that, and I say, my favorite maple today is, I don't know, maybe Acer rubescens or Kawakami. No, I guess rubescens. Only because it's starting to turn color in the garden at home. Tomorrow, I don't know, it's going to be something else. Actually, I saw a pretty fine sugar maple yesterday, and that I have to say that was probably the best looking maple, in terms of color. Mm-hmm. But then, ask me what my favorite maple is in terms of texture, or my favorite maple in terms of just hanging on for dear life. I mean, I've got some favorites at home. I think the name is it Sensu? Mm-hmm. Is that yeah? And I think that's
what a Talon Shirasala.
Yeah, and that's just a fantastic plant. And I've got a whole bunch of interesting things in pots. I've got oblongum in a pot that I have to cut back. Every other year I have to cut it back to the ground. I mean, I'm I like more than just maples. I'm pretty fanatical about plants in general. Maples. I have a kind of a soft spot for maples, and I'm not even sure why that is, but where I grew up, where I still live, there are 3 species of maples, and bigleaf maple and vine maple and Rocky Mountain maple are all within a few miles of my place, and those I think are touchstones for me for sure. But when I did my graduate degree, I definitely I said I want to study maples, and in fact I went to my advisor and I said I want to go to China. I want to study maples, and he said, okay, well what you have to do is you have to make a plan, figure out all the things that you need to do, and these are the things that I feel you need to do, and then come back and tell me whether or not this is a good idea. And so, of course, I went away, and within a couple of days, I realized, oh man, this is just like there's too much to consider. And so, we went through it, talked about it, and my research is actually a pretty technical name. The thesis was the systematics of Rocky Mountain maple, and really that's just how do the different variants of Rocky Mountain maple, how do they kind of fit together, and how does the species relate to other species and that kind of thing, and so we arrived at that because what my advisor said is you look for if you're looking to do systematic research, you have to look for a plant where there are a whole bunch of names attached to it, and because what that indicates is that people are not really sure what's going on, and And clearly, with Rocky Mountain maple, people didn't really have any idea what was going on. We had about 17 names that were attached to essentially what turned out to be one species. And so I did a bunch of work. I did some chemical work, and I did some morphological work, and I got herbarium specimens from all across North America, and I studied those and measured things, and I did a thing called principal components analysis, which is far too complicated to explain here. In fact, I'm not sure I even understood it when I did it. But it sort of turned out that it was actually fairly straightforward. You got a kind of north-south and an east-west set of the variants, and so when I look at a Rocky Mountain maple leaf, I can probably tell you whether it came from California or New Mexico or Colorado or northern British Columbia or southern Alaska. And I felt pretty good about that, and it appealed to my both to my kind of scientific inquiring mind, but also it was a nice project. It finished. I had an answer,
That's always good.
Yeah, it was kind of practical. I could, if somebody wanted to know something about Rocky Mountain maple, nobody does, but if they ask, then, I could be the guy who gives the answer. And so I collected seed all around Western North America, and I grew that stuff. And I just so happened to eventually end up working for a botanical garden where I could actually grow those seedlings that I actually collected the seed of. And so, if you come to the garden, you can see Rocky Mountain. Maybe you can see why people don't collect Rocky Mountain.
I know when we go to gardens, you're always the person that someone grabs and they say, hey, what's this species over here?
Right.
Hey, this thing's been mislabeled. And I know that you have that knowledge of what makes these plants different. What kind of challenges do you have in trying to identify these plants in the gardens?
That's a good question.
It's probably the most annoying thing.
No. I actually, I love plants, and I love, I love people's curiosity about plants, and if I can, help people to understand things about plants. And I always figure that if you tell a person what a plant is, that actually is going to help them move a little further along, rather than just, like checking off a list.
Right.
And when I was like little, I was a kid, and I was really, how kids get interested in naming dinosaurs or model cars or
right.
what, I don't know. You guys are much younger than I am, but, when I was a kid, my friends, could name like 15 dinosaurs, right? With scientific names. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. Well, I started learning plants, and because my parents both talked about plants, and it came as a huge shock to me when I was about 10 that other kids that I knew didn't know what a Douglas fir was, or a cotoneaster, or a maple. Like they didn't know. Like the horse chestnut over there. The what? Like people just. And I thought, oh my God, this is not like I must be abnormal or something. Like in
the best way possible.
Well, but in my family it wasn't. But clearly I figured that that people were either not interested or not been exposed to that. But luckily, my family. It was okay to be weird, right? It was okay to be different, and my parents both encouraged me to, follow my passion, and my passion from a very early age was plants, and so I was looking at the built landscape. I was looking at Japanese maples, and I was looking at other trees, flowering cherries, and all that. And I started to catalog those things. And then when I was in high school, I worked for an indoor plant store. They used to have, I don't know if they still have these kind of things. It's all on Amazon now. But I used to sell tropical plants to people, and it was a good way to meet.
Right.
I'm a bit flirtatious, and it was a good way, like a kind of safe way to meet girls or whatever. But I basically spent most of the time when there weren't people coming into the store, like memorizing pictures in tropical plant books, and I got very good at I know what that is. I know what that is. Having never seen it in the flesh before, just from pictures. And in fact, I guess I was 21 or 22. My dad and I went on a botanical expedition that the Botanical Garden had organized, and we went to Borneo.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. So we went. This is a 4-week trip. We started in Hong Kong, and then we went to Thailand. And then from Thailand, we went to Singapore, and from Singapore, we went to Malaysia. We ended up in Borneo, and we climbed up Mount Kinabalu, which is in northeastern Borneo, and it's like the tallest peak outside of New Guinea, I think, in Southeast Asia. And there are rhododendrons up there, and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And we're going through the tropics, and we went through the Singapore Botanic Garden, and I recognized all kinds of plants. And so I was walking around with people, and I said, "Oh, that's blah 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 blah," and these are, I don't know, I was 20, and I'd not had any sort of formal training in botany, and I got very comfortable with doing that, with basically like being sure that I knew what that was. I mean, it was kind of crazy at the same time, because it was really just all like somewhere back there. And then, once you get that, and so, this thing about the 10,000 hours that kids do, if you do something sort of intense for 10,000 hours, then it becomes a kind of natural thing for you. Well, I guess I covered the 10,000 hours pretty early because it just became easier and easier and easier just to, I see a plant and I see a name and I'm going to remember it. Most of the time, it only takes once and I remember it. Now, you're a little bit like that.
A little bit.
Because you can do that. I have never met anyone who had the kind of recall that you have. I'd say you're pretty close to
different ways.
Yeah, but basically, you see, I don't know if you see that name in your head and it just comes out and you just associate it with, I don't know. I mean, I need a psychologist to help me here. But clearly some of us are wired very differently, and we can access that kind of plant library. That's what I do. And I do that like day in and day out. I drive my wife insane, because we can't go for a walk in the park, right? Yeah. Because I cannot not look at something and basically say, maybe inside, that's blah, 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 and I'm always testing myself. And, and that, again, that's one of the things, one of our connections. I come to the Maple Society and I'm interested in people who are curious and people who are knowledgeable and people who are not afraid to actually express themselves in that way. And that really makes me feel like I'm part of the same community that you guys are. We're doing different stuff, but man.
I mean, we're as lowbrow as you can get, and you're as academic as you can get. But it's like, no, I joke, but like, I appreciate that, because I always leave feeling inspired and appreciate your time, and I always leave thinking, I've learned so much about this new thing. So we used to do this goofy thing at our nursery, and we were trying to get more people into species maples, and we called it the Go Wild collection. Yeah. And then basically what we would do is we would get a collection of wild collected plants with provenance, and then we would try to sell them on this cool story from a guy like you and say that, Douglas Justice collected this in the special mission where he went, and that adventure of it's so cool to us. Like we probably need to bring that back. It was actually a fun thing. Yeah. But it was a way for your home gardener, hopefully, maybe, to kind of relate to some of why this is so important about why you should grow this rare Acer species in your garden too.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting about today, Tony Avent, who's like a god in the
talk about memory recall.
In the nursery pantheon, he's right up there, and and he was talking about if you want to save a plant, you share a plant, you basically propagate it and you give it away, or you sell it, or however you can, you get it out there. And I so strongly believe in that. At the same time, like I'm going with an institution, and meeting with institutional partners in a place like Vietnam, and we're going on a hike to look for plants and to catalog stuff, and we're looking at just how tenuous it all is. Are these plants still actually where they were recorded 50 years ago, and we're finding like fewer and fewer places where you can find these things. And so when we come across an area, like there are a couple of places I can think of, that you come across an area and they're essentially unspoiled, and you walk in and you see the diversity of these plants, and you see like 4 maple species within 50 feet. It's just like blows your mind. And and what I want to do is I want to make sure that those things don't disappear.
Yeah.
And so the way that we make sure that they don't disappear is that subsequently we go back and we collect the seed and we grow that material in the botanical garden. Now, in Canada, we're signatories to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and so we're limited in some ways in what we can distribute and how we can distribute. And so we have to jump through a number of hoops. If our permits are only for scientific collection, then we can't share that stuff. But there are other permits, and so some of our plant hunter friends, like Dan Hinckley, for example, he gets a different kind of permit, and that allows him to distribute those plants. And so it's really lucky. In fact, Dan Hinckley has been on I've been on some of the same expeditions that he's been on. And so that material does, get out. So we have it in the botanical garden, and we can't sort of share it, from there. But the same material is also being collected, and it's legally being able to be distributed. And so I want to say, I told a story the other day about finding that beautiful Acer campbellii relative, and everybody thought the name of it was Acer heptaphlebum, and that, heptaphlebum, that means 7 veins, and so it was always like a big mystery why our Acer heptaphlebum didn't have 7 veins. They were like 5 lobed leaves, where the other 2 veins. and so in the 2018, when we went to Vietnam, Dan Crowley, who the maple expert from England, he was on that trip, and so we were looking at this Acer heptaphlebum, and he said, this is not Acer heptaphlebum. So, but I know where we can find Acer heptaphlebum, and so it was earlier than 2018. But anyway, so on our way back, we drove to the place where you can find the true Acer heptaphlebum. We had no idea whether or not we'd find it, but we did, which was great, because now we know that Acer heptaphlebum is a 7-lobed, big, it's a leaf like size of my hand. Very, very different looking. But then it didn't solve the problem. What do we call this other thing? And this other thing, this campbellii relative, comes in green, light brown, purple brown. Sometimes, the light brown ones have purple on the underside. So there's all this variation. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to make a horticultural plant.
Right.
Like there's no way that if people see this, they're not going to want it. I used to have to flea beam. Okay, it's okay. But this other unnamed thing. So number one, we got to get a name on it. But number two, we've got to get it out there.
Yeah.
We have to get it out there. And you guys, I'm telling you, you would love this plant. You saw some pictures. Yeah. And anyway,
you know we're maple geeks, and when it comes to these cool species, whenever there's those stories and the fun things behind them, it's not just the plant itself, it's the expedition of people going and finding them. And I think that's one of the things that really gets people a little excited about some of these wild collected things, because you've got the plant itself, you've got the environment that this came from. Yeah. I mean, how many expeditions are you going on where you're out there, you're dealing with snakes, spiders, and all these other wildlife when you're out there doing this? I mean,
I loved your presentation. I know we don't have the whole thing here, but just briefly talk a little bit about that. And I'll do a follow-up question later.
But what kinds of wildlife and other challenges, environmental challenges, do you face on these crazy expeditions?
Yeah, well, I've been to Vietnam now, in northern Vietnam, 3 times, and it's been different every time. And 1 year we were there, and it rained incessantly, and so that really limited where we could go, because you got steep mountain trails or whatever. If it's raining, it's slow and difficult. The other 2 times we were there, the weather was actually really good, and so it was easy to get around. So I'll tell you 2 stories. One is that we went up Mount Fansipan, which is the highest peak in northern Vietnam, and we'd been up there a couple of times, and it's you take the gondola up right up to the top.
The pictures you showed were like, whoa,
it's like
risking life and limb here.
No, it's like it's like a sky ride going up to a ski hill or something. I mean, it's a lot higher and a lot longer ride, but anyway, that's the easy part, and you get up to the top, and you're on the top of the mountain, then you just walk down the mountain and you're looking for stuff, and that's great. But the last time we were up there, we noticed that it looked like there was snow on the top of the mountain, and we thought, wow, that's amazing, there's snow on the top of the mountain. The closer we got to the top, the more we realized that it was like a coating of ice on everything. It had been an ice storm. I guess it rained and then froze solid, and everything was slick. And I'll tell you, when you're on the top of a mountain and there's an ice storm, this is not a safe place to be. So that's one of the dangers of obviously walking in the mountains. And so we took the gondola back down. The other story is that we were on a hike in an area called Five Fingers, and that really unbelievable. It's like being in the lost world. I got to say, some of you sort of wake up and you look around and go, has anyone actually ever been here before? It just looks so unbelievably pristine and wild, and waterfalls and stuff. And we woke up one morning, and that was the morning where there was the sign on my tent, "Don't use the back door," and that was because there was a 200-foot drop out the back. But that's not what I wanted to say. So we were going to walk up the hill from this campsite because we wanted to see what we could see. And so there's this long line of us snaking up the hill, and all of a sudden we stopped, and what's going on? And we're all looking like this, and you could see the porters who were leading you could see just the body language. They were like nervous and turning around and talking kind of in hushed tones. Evidently there was somebody there was a snake. And I'm talking like a big snake. And so they were all freaked out. And so, of course, we were all freaked out. And so we kind of turned around, and we were all walking back down the trail. So I've seen a couple of snakes there, but just kind of curled up and not. I'm not great on snakes, I have to say. So it was good to see they weren't moving. And they were, kind of over there, and I avoided it. But this was like to see the fear in these guys, and these are mountain guys, right? To see the fear in their eyes.
The guys that actually encounter this on a daily basis. When you see them start getting freaked out.
Yeah.
All right, so I just wanted to jump in here and just say what a pleasure it's been to meet you and to be a part of the Maple Society and so many amazing people to meet. And you've certainly been one of them I've enjoyed talking with. And, it always amazes me of just on the scientific side to think about how many amazing plants you've seen and so many species of plants you've studied. And maybe you could just share, as a collector, I have a different perspective on maples specifically, but as a botanist, what is it that you think makes maples such a special thing that has been a focus of your attention?
Right. Well, so I think sort of intellectually, the thing that attracted me to maples is that we all look at the world and we see patterns, and some people ignore those patterns and other people don't. So you recognize, like you've never seen a snow leopard before, but it's a cat, right? Yeah. So that's a pattern that people kind of figure. And so I look at plants, and people who look at plants a lot start to see patterns. And so I'm looking at maples and I'm seeing, how do these plants, how do they relate to each other? How similar are they? Why is a leaf the shape it is? And why is a different species, why does it have basically the same leaf? Or why do two species have vastly different leaves if they're both maples? Like, when you first discover maples that don't have palmately lobed leaves, you go, wait a minute, how could that be a maple? And then you see the samaras, you see those paired samaras, and you go, oh, it's got to be a maple, or you look at something like Acer carpinifolium we saw today, the hornbeam maple, and it's got leaves that look like that have doubly serrated edges, just like a hornbeam, but they're in opposite pairs, and if you happen across the female of that species, you might see samaras. If you see the male, you might be completely lost.
Right.
But, my interest is in seeing that broader picture. And, don't get me wrong, I collect Acer palmatum cultivars because I love to see that variation and to wonder and to appreciate the beauty of that. And like, there are very few plants that I look at and I go, ooh, I don't like that. Like plants to me aren't ugly. And maples sort of embody a particularly elegant, something really compelling about all maples, Big leaf maples got, sometimes got leaves this, bigger than your head, like gigantic. And, Acer glabrum variety diffusum, grows on top of mountains in Nevada and has leaves that are that big, like they're that big. How does that happen? I'm interested in why those things look the way they do. But beyond that, like Talon, I'm also just interested in the wonder, the beauty, and and I think maples are just it's the kind of the right size group. It's got 150 of something, and so there's all that variety. And then you want to look closer, like at Acer palmatum, then you got 5,000 things to look at. I don't know. Is that right?
Okay, so to piggyback on Brian's question a little bit, it got me thinking. You were talking about how you like to collect palmatums, but you have such a background and knowledge on so much that has to do with just acers. What other acers outside of palmatum? Palmatum get all the love, right? They get all the attention. What other areas do you think have more maybe possible commercial value, or that should be looked at for more future development?
Yeah, I mean that's that's a really big question, and I think we don't really have enough time to give
like a highlight.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so what I would say, and you guys are used to me now. I do tend to go on about the things that I'm interested in, but I think that you can kind of distill it down to a couple of things. And one is that the Palmata group, right? The fork branch maples are popular because they are fork branch maples, and that makes them like appropriate sized plants, right? You look at a Norway maple or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
a little harder to collect.
They're going to get big, and so within that group, right? Within the Palmata group, that is unexplored. I mean, we're basically scratching the surface of those species. And like you guys, you collect seed from Acer oliverianum, that where there's a palmatum nearby, there's a pretty good chance that you've got hybrid seed. And so not only should we be looking at those species, looking at species that we're unfamiliar with, those things that we can bring in from the wild, but also, we should be like breeding with those things, to make, I can think of, 3 or 4 species that I think, are already worthy of collecting, but that may, only grow, where it's cool.
So
right?
like as a plant hoarder and maple guy, I look at it like, well, what species have superpowers that I need to make sure my maples have? So like this is super heat tolerant. So like what can I enhance? How can I go colder? How can I improve what's there by kind of
increase drought resistance?
Yeah,
Find
like
something that's a little more likely to not have root rot.
Increase frost resistance, increase
Verticillium
all the things
resistance.
we fight as gardeners. Like there's a lot out there to play with, and we're all right here in this one little area for.
Yeah. And, like a really good example of that, I think we all know Acer cibolianum. And Acer cibolianum is, one of my favorite maples. It's a beautiful sized leaf, and it's nice and fuzzy, and, it looks great in the spring, it looks good in the fall. It's a lovely plant, but it's a little bit verticillium prone. Like we plant it out in Vancouver, if we don't plant it on a fairly steep bank or something, then it's pretty short-lived. And it'd be really great to have something that looked like that, where we could breed some verticillium resistance into that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole world out there kind of waiting for us to capture that. And the stuff that I've seen in Vietnam, that's just, the tip of the iceberg, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we actually save that stuff before it disappears. There are, a couple of oddball things like Acer calcaratum that, not
cool plant.
Yeah, very cool plant.
Love that plant.
Yeah, not, and it appears to be disappearing from the wild pretty quickly.
We grafted on palmatum.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, and great. That's fantastic. And so we have a few individuals around. It would be nice to have a little bit more of that genetic diversity.
We lost a variegated one.
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about variegated stuff. So,
we know I could talk the whole time about some of your adventures in Vietnam. We saw a presentation on it this week. There was so much interesting stuff from food to the dangers involved to, just every aspect of it. What are some of, and you've probably been to so many places, it's I hate to say favorite because some of those might be more challenging, but I would say what are some of your more prominent places that you traveled to, besides Vietnam, or also including Vietnam, that you like to wild collect in?
Yeah, well, we have a trip planned for next year for Japan, and the last time I was in Japan, we weren't collecting, but I certainly was looking at plants, on that level. Japan is just so rich, and again, it's 28 species of maples in Japan. many of them in the Palmata group.
Right.
And, we barely scraping the surface there. Unfortunately, Tibet is, kind of out of reach. And even if we could go there, we can't go there now, but even if we could, seed is probably impossible. We saw some pretty unbelievable stuff in Tibet. However, right across the border in Arunachal Pradesh, that's like right there. In fact, the Tibetans or the Chinese don't accept the border, so that it's a little bit, talk about dangerous. You don't want to be in a border area when there's a border dispute between two nuclear armed countries. But that's a very rich place, and I know Dan Hinckley has been to Arunachal several times, and he's been in Myanmar, and so essentially all those areas, it's kind of bordering China, are very, very rich in maples, and again they're sort of montane, so they may not suit every climate, but again that's genetic material that we we could be using that, and we could be growing that. So I would say, like, top of my list for places, I have to say, is that Five Fingers area of Vietnam. It was just so, like, every step was
Your
like
photos were amazing.
Jurassic Park. I mean, it looks like something from the ancient world.
Basically, and that was kind of exhilarating. It was kind of scary, right? Like you didn't know what was around the corner, and but that kind of exhilarated. You don't forget that.
That might be where the tigers are hiding.
Yeah, well, in fact, the porters were saying that there were reports of tiger. Who knows? Probably not, but maybe.
That's why I hesitated to say favorite, because I saw some of the conditions that you go through to get these things.
Yeah.
And favorite might be relative to what you went through being there, but also favorite plant. You're going to be drawn to the plants whether it's in those harsh conditions or not. Yeah. So I think that stuff's so cool. We could talk to you about plant exploration all day. I think it's something that I probably most of our audience, and at least most of the commercial audience, we got a lot of plant collectors, but they're plant collectors. They probably don't even know this interesting side of it. So I think that's something I wanted to get you on here to talk about, because there are people out here preserving this stuff and finding these things. You said something in your presentation I thought was really excellent, and that was the extract without giving back. And you're like, you want to make sure that you don't extract without giving back. And I really appreciated just the human compassion element that comes with what you're doing. And you see all these aspects of it, but you're also you're not just looking at the plants, you're looking at the people and like the situations. And it was I was like, wow, this is awesome. But,
you can't help when you go to a place like Northern Vietnam, people are living subsistence lives, and you can't help but feel compassion, and that. They may be destroying a part of the forest, but they're only doing it because they need to feed their families. And so you have to weigh those things. You say, conservation is important, and we have to do whatever we can to help to conserve, those places intact. And if we can't like save those things as intact ecosystems, then we at least should save some of the plants that are in those ecosystems. And if that means, collecting a few seed, and spreading them around, then that's what we have to do. Yeah. I'm really happy to be a part of that kind of exploration that's based on a conservation ethic, but at the same time knowing that to conserve we have to share, and that's right.
That really spoke to me in your presentation. I was like, wow, to have that human element and make sure that you're thinking about those things. It was like, it's pretty cool. So I'll tell you this little anecdote. I told you this the other night when we were out, and it made me laugh. And I don't know if you even remembered the story, but we were in Belgium a couple years ago, and it was probably like, 2013, the Maple Society meeting, 14? I don't know. Anyway, we were in Belgium, and you and us, Augustin and I, walked out of this bar, and all the sides of the roads were fenced off. and there were like screaming girls on either side of the road, and we're like, "What's going on?" And apparently, the guy from Twilight was supposed to come down through there, but we'd walked out this door, and maybe you're used to that. No. But I'm not used to hundreds of screaming girls when I walk out of the bar. But they were all kind of like, "Who are these guys?" Like, I was still kind of confused when we came out, but not really a question, but it was just something I remember, experiencing with you that I thought was hilarious. But
I remember
a good time on that Belgium trip.
Looking back, thinking maybe Robert Pattinson. I think that's his name. It's like behind
my wife
us
would know
or
for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll jump in here again and ask you about this. We shared a conversation earlier on the bus. Like you said, there's so many great conversations happening there. And I really enjoyed you telling me about your app. And could you talk to me a little bit about your app that you helped create and design and information you were able to input into that?
Yeah.
And, because I think even though it might be centralized to your location, I think there's a lot of valuable information there that people would enjoy just going and reading and learning about. So,
So basically, I teach in a university landscape architecture program, and I've been doing that for many years. And early on, students would ask me, where can I get this information that you're talking about? And because I grew up in Vancouver, and I'm an observer, and grew plants for a living, and so I kind of understand the sort of garden ecology of what's happening. And I had to admit there was really nowhere they said to talk to me, or talk to somebody else who did the same thing, and so that spurred me to create basically to start writing a book. But then I didn't really want to write a book. I wanted to have something that was sort of more accessible and cheaper, and something that students and landscape architects could look at. And so we created this app called Vancouver Trees, and that it's essentially just there's a page of information that you can then drill down and get sort of more in context information, and there are pictures and there are maps in Vancouver, and it was pretty successful. It's hard to make any money on an app, but we weren't really interested in making money. Although my wife was disappointed I wasn't making money, but that wasn't the point of it. The point of it, because I was working for the university and supported by that, and so that information is presented in that context. And since publishing that, I've moved on to expanding that, and I expanded it to basically all the woody plants in Vancouver. Wow. So we're going to hopefully through the university, we're going to publish that in an online sort of database, pictures and hyperlink glossary and things like that.
What's the best way for anybody to find that?
Well, I can't find it yet because we're not there yet, but that's kind of coming soon. If people go to the App Store, they can find Vancouver Trees. Unfortunately, it's only iOS. We basically lost the funding and couldn't do Android after a certain time. So that's only available if people have iPhones. But it is available, and it's I think there's a cheap version, and you can do an in-app purchase if you want the higher resolution pictures and that kind of thing. But,
well, I'll ask this too as a follow-up. Is that one of the best ways to support what you do? Or is there a place people could go maybe through UBC to help support some of the stuff you're doing, or even purchasing some of your books and things like that?
Well, absolutely. The any money that is spent on the app goes to the Botanical Garden, and all the money that goes to the Botanical Garden supports the programs, including our exploration. And if people want more information, they can go to the UBC Botanical Garden website. And
it's a great forum. I know specifically for Maple Society members, the UBC, great forum, great use there. And I know a lot of people really appreciate that as Maple Society people.
Yeah, I know a lot of maple collectors get on the UBC forums, and that may be how they know UBC. Right. I mean, because they went into the Maple forums and get in there and start looking at all the photos people post growing all over the United States, all over the world, of their Japanese maples. And yet they don't realize that this is actually attached to the UBC.
Probably for many Americans, yeah.
Yeah. So at the UBC, what do you do with the gardens themselves at UBC?
Oh, okay. So we're kind of a traditional botanical garden. So we have programming for education for kids, but we're a university botanical garden, which means that there's research occasionally that's undertaken in the garden. So professor will send a grad student down and want to study a particular group of plants, or they want to study a wide range of plants. I teach in the garden, so there's plenty of teaching in the garden. Our mission, includes public display, education, research, community, and serving the sort of the greater good of being a beautiful place for people. And it's one of the really rewarding things about working in a botanical garden is that, people come to the botanical garden because they want to see plants, and I can't think of a kind of a nicer place to come to, to enjoy nature, even though it's the built landscape. It's a safe place. It's a beautiful place, and it's an interesting place.
And it's got a lot of your wild collections.
Yeah.
That's always a positive too.
Oh, yeah.
You can walk around there and be like, I remember that trip. That's where the snake was.
Yeah.
I remember that trip. That's where the ice was.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we've got to find a better way to tell some of these stories. Maybe as Dershman, we've got to find a better way to talk about some of the cool things you're doing, because at the end of the day, a lot of our customers love stories, and stories and people are some of what draws us to plants. And it's interesting. I mean, it's like, well, is the commercial gardener going to buy this long name species? Well, maybe. Maybe if we give them a chance to, and we present it to them in a way that they can understand what it was about and why it was collected and why it's interesting, and something we should be trying more.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you need to do, or we all need to do, is we got to make sure that the plants that we're putting out to the public are good plants. Good plants for people's gardens, and not just it's not just like putting another notch in your belt. I got this great plant. Particularly for those things that we want to protect, we want to share, and we want to make sure that we don't lose those things. So, let's sell what's appropriate to sell, and I think you guys are doing that. But I want, if I can be any help in providing you with more, more and more unusual stuff.
Be careful what you ask for. We will bug you to death. So be careful with that one. We have. We like to do that a lot, but yeah, I just really appreciate your time. You've always been so kind, and just sitting down and explaining, basic botany stuff to me and Tim that we have no idea about, because again, our backgrounds are not in that.
Like yesterday when you explained to me the difference between a species and a subspecies, like that really helped me understand a little bit of that situation, and I really appreciate you taking time to actually stop and explain that to people.
Right. And
that means a lot to us, and we really learn a lot from that. And we always seek learning out stuff from you when we're out here at a lot of these Maple Society events, because you're a fun person to be around, first off.
And it's pretty charismatic. I'm going to guess that at that tropical shop, a lot of those ladies weren't coming in for the tropical plants you were flirting with. This guy's a charismatic guy. That's one of the reasons we want to get you on here. You're always cracking me up. We always have a good time chatting, and I just want to get you on here and talk to you about what you do a little bit, and hopefully open some people up who might be more from that ornamental side into this other world of plant exploration, one, but also conservation, and just that other world of acers that's way bigger than you might have initially thought when you purchased this lace leaf at a local garden center.
Well, I mean, it's
a whole bigger world of it.
It's all connected. And you guys are worth it. Come on.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for being on here today. Really appreciate it. And thanks so much for listening.
Take care, y'all.
Wow, everybody. I mean, how much more exciting can you get in the plant world than people going out into the wild, finding these things, identifying them, dealing with all the plants, the animals, and the people in these foreign countries? That's just amazing that someone's actually out there doing that, trying to preserve these plants.
Oh, I think it's so interesting. I mean, Brian and Sean joked that he's like Indiana Jones, but for plants. And I think that's a perfect way to look at it. He gets out there, he explores these things, but with the conscious mind of preserving these things. And he's very conscious. He talks a lot about, caring for the people in these countries and what part of their income these plants are and things like that. And so they really think about all aspects of it. And one of the reasons we wanted to show you this is from a collector perspective. Unless you're attending Maple Society meetings, you might not even know about this whole maple academia and this whole side of it. We have several friends who are plant explorers, and these guys go out in search of sometimes the last of something. Sometimes they're preserving something that's going extinct. Sometimes they're finding something that we don't know even exists yet. And then, identifying that taxa and how does it relate to other maples that are in the known world of Japanese maples or, maples in general, maple species.
Douglas is such a fun, exciting person. I really hope that y'all enjoyed this podcast because we enjoy talking to Douglas. And that's one of the reasons we thought y'all would enjoy this conversation we had with him. It's interesting to see what got him into plants, and it was interesting to see all the stuff that he has to go through when he does these trips to these foreign countries.
Yeah, we recorded this right after the Maple Society, so just special thanks to Douglas Justice. He's always so kind with his time with us. And again, he's always somebody I catch. He's like, hey, Matt, you want to go grab a drink after the presentations? And I'm like, yes. And let me sit right next to you and ask you a million questions. Because he's just fascinating to me. And he has such an interesting mind, not only for this side of it, but he appreciates cultivars and Japanese maples. He's not a species purist. He appreciates what we do. And he always has great advice for me. And I'm always so interested to listen to him and soak that up. And we wanted to kind of get a little bit of that on camera for you and hopefully capture a little bit of the magic about that. He was so kind. We actually recorded this after the North American Maple Society, the International Maple Society meeting with Douglas traveling in from Canada. It was actually an international meeting. And we actually just commandeered the hotel room there after the society meeting and waited for him to quit vacuuming while they were cleaning up and said, hey, we've got one more thing we need to do in here. And so Douglas was so gracious to meet with us after everything was over and just put that time in to let us record him and talk to him while we had him there in person. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you do, make sure to give us a 5-star on any of your major podcast platforms. You can subscribe to us and, always hop in these live chats. If you're watching this after the fact, we premiere the video format of this on the YouTube, on the Mr. Maple Show. You can find us on any major podcast platforms under the same name, Mr. Maple Show. But on YouTube, we air these every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you can always find us there, subscribe, hop in that live chat. There's a whole community of gardeners discussing things live in there, and it's a fun way to get involved. And I think we're building a great community there in that live chat. So it's a really fun thing to get involved with.
And Matt and I will be doing more and more of these podcasts. We'll have some podcasts coming up that are teaching you about Japanese maples, and then we'll have many more where we interview fantastic people in gardening all about them and Japanese maples. And so really hope you all enjoy this podcast we've been putting forward for y'all because this is something that's really fun for us. And
it's a little bit of a passion project. We want to make the stuff we would like to listen to, and we hope we're opening you up to new ideas. Like we have some interesting garden design people coming up. We have, all kinds of different interesting aspects. And I wanted to get Douglas on here because I assume a lot of our, collectors at home may not even know about this entire world of maples and maple species and the kind of the work that's going on with those. And Douglas is the perfect guy to talk about.
Definitely is. We appreciate y'all for watching. Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.